if I at any point, my computer's been really weird, randomly shutting off from time to time. So if I just disappear, I hope it keeps going and I can log back on again in just a minute. But you guys can just go ahead and keep going if that happens.
All right, yeah, no problem. I'll cover in that. It should stay open with us here. It shouldn't drop it, but we'll figure out. And don't worry, Stefan, Ryan, who does our editing, he's really good at this stuff. So if you need to like stop, start over, something of that sort, just don't worry about it. All good. Do what you need to do. He's really good at editing. So
okay,
all editing and the sound as well.
If I have a baby crying in the background,
yes, no problem.
Go away.
No problem. If the cat's probably going to jump on me at some point.
Yep, and I have 2 children home right now because they're out of school. So don't worry, chaos.
Sounds good. We'll start then. Okay, välkommen alla sammen. We have a very special episode. I've spoken to both of my guests a little over a year ago about shamanism, when I started to cover the related things to shamanism in the Norse beliefs. And then we have Christina here, who is a specialist in all things shamanism from all around the world. And I really liked, I spoke with Stefan before, he's kind of specializing in the Slavic mythology and paganism. And he did a video on kind of shamanic related practices in the east of Europe. So we're going to go over all of that today, cover a few topics related to shamanism, and kind of fill in the blanks where all of our missing sources are on each of these topics. So I'm super excited for this. We could start with Christina then, maybe. What is the kind of your background in studying shamanism related things and or anything spiritual, but tying it into the shamanism topics we're going to speak about today?
So my background in all things shamanism and shamanism related, because as we know, the word shamanism is a Siberian word, actually. So there's different names for it all over the place. I've had many different teachers, from Peruvian shamanism, from the Pacos, to Native American medicine, to Siberian shamanism and all that stuff. I've been doing it, I guess you can say, all of my life. I've realized as I've been going about things that, little silly things I used to do as a kid was a real thing, and that it's folk magic, something of that sort. But my official training has been, I guess you can say, since maybe 8 years ago, 7, 8 years ago, in really deep diving into all things shamanic, all things trance, divination, so on and so forth. So that's long story short, I guess you can say.
Perfect, thank you. So yeah, that's what a shaman is. Of course, it's practices that are from all around the world. We all have similar practices like that, but the original shaman word that came from Siberia, and then the Russians kind of made it their own into their language, and they're the ones who really kind of spread it through the world with their scholarship in the last 100 or 200 years. But I always find it really interesting how the shamanism is technically a Russian word and practice. And so we don't think of it as like a traditionally European or even a Slavic thing. It's mostly coming from the Eastern Russia, like Siberia. But that is not correct at all, because we have Stefan here, and he knows a lot of things, a lot of parallels related to shamanism from the Slavic tradition. So would you maybe, Stefan, tell us quickly about your background and the research you've done, and kind of what led you to discover the topics of shamanism in the east of Europe?
Yeah, well, I have been researching Slavic, paganism, mythology, and so forth, primarily because of my personal interest, and because it's a very obscure topic, and there's not a lot of sources. It hasn't been written down, so it's very difficult to come to some real historically confirmed practices and so forth. But at the same time, the folklore of Slavic people is thankfully kind of very conservative in this sense, and it has preserved many interesting, let's say, practices, incantations, and similar things which could be related to other shamanic practices of other people in Europe and beyond. So I've only researched it from this perspective, not very deeply like practicing or anything like that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and that's why it's why we're a good team. The topics we're about to go over, it's the same thing as with the Norse sources. There's maybe a little bit more closer ties to shamanism in the culture that we can find, but that's why we have Christine here, because any kind of sources that we have, she probably knows in actual practice to fill in the blanks from somewhere else in the world. So hopefully that's what we're gonna figure out a bit of today. So we have a list of topics related to shamanism that we're going to go into in no specific order, and then we can all just chime in if we have some input about it. So first, meditation. How does it relate to meditation? Key part of it, of course, in the Norse sources, we have specifically Odin, who was said to be able to fall into a death-like sleep and then send his soul out of his body in the shape of a bird or snake or something like that. So that's very clearly an example of meditation. We also have many sagas accounting the Finns getting into like a death-like sleep, covering themselves with an animal skin or something like that, and sending their soul to a faraway land to observe it, or changing into an animal, or controlling the weather, or certain things like that. So even though there's not a Norse word for meditation, and most people don't think of the Norse as being meditators, the sources are there. So from either of you two, is there kind of an example or parallel of Of course, Christina's going to have a lot to say, so maybe we can start with Stefan. Is there anything from the Slavic tradition that has to do with this meditation type thing and practices of shamanism?
Well, yeah. Since you mentioned meditation, there's nothing related to what people would associate with the Eastern types of meditation, of stillness of the mind and so forth. At least not in what I've encountered. But when there's clear parallels to what you mentioned about Odin. Since the 10th century, the earliest sources are, but those sources are mainly the Christian sources which condemn such practices. They basically speak against people who fall into a trance-like state, and their spirit leaves their body in a shape of an animal. It really varies, the type of animal, and they usually do this in order to protect their village and crops and so forth from either dragon-like, serpent-like beings or other shamans who are attacking them, or similar creatures. Sometimes the deceased who have died by drowning or similar violent deaths are also said to be bringers of these hailstorms. And it really depends on the folklore, but yeah, this definitely exists, and it ties to other practices which are related to warfare and so forth. But I guess we can speak about it after.
Yeah, we'll go into that later. Yeah, very cool. So it's more like it's recorded not so much in the mythology and the legends that we have in the Slavic sources, but more like laws and folklore, like prohibiting these
Absolutely,
types of
yeah.
things.
As I said, the earliest mentions are Christians speaking against it from the 10th century, both in South Slavic and Eastern Slavic sources. And but the majority of the material is basically ethnographic 19th century, 18th centuries, where people actually believed or spoke about people who could do these things, especially from the south. from the Balkans.
Hmm. Okay. So yeah, does that ring any bells, then, Christina? We can speak about meditation all day, but any specific mentions of either what I or Stefan said that kind of comes to mind, and shamanic practices that you've known?
So it seems that meditation is used in obviously a wide variety of things, because in more Norse practices and stuff like that, meditation is used for ancestral connection, astral travel, going into, same thing as like going into animal bodies, embodying it and stuff. You find a little bit of that parallels actually in Peruvian shamanism, to where it's connecting to spirits, so spirits of the animal, to embody, not necessarily to like kind of take command of it, but to take the medicine from the animal and embed it into yourself and bring it in as life lessons and all that stuff. Yeah, with Norse, you have like Utiseta, as you know, that was the first thing that came to my mind, for with sitting out in the middle of the night on a burial mound, all that stuff to connect with ancestors. As far as using them for war, stuff like that, there is a little bit in Native American, to where it's like skinwalkers, things like that. But those are more so known as like a outcasted, vengeful kind of witch or something of that sort that's doing that kind of skinwalking. But they would actually like not necessarily hire those people, but enlist them to actually like hurt other tribes and all that stuff. I mean, that's what Peter Whitefeather has told me about skinwalkers. But yeah, it seems like meditation is, as far as Peruvian shamanism, is very much more of that inner healing, very much a tree, rooting yourself into the ground. Spine acts as the mid part of the tree, the top acts as a canopy to connect to the divine, and so on and so forth. And again, you find a little bit of that parallel, the same thing in Norse shamanism. The only big difference is the animal archetypes. I have yet to find some sort of Norse shamanism to where there's a medicine wheel. You see, the sun wheel is the same thing, but I've yet to find a medicine wheel that has animal archetypes that you embody through meditation.
Yeah, that's maybe one thing I wanted to touch on. It's not on our list of topics, but the specific positions that one should be in meditation. So that's different from around the world, of course. In the Buddhist tradition or Hindu, they'll sit cross-legged in the lotus stance, whatever. We have no evidence of that being done in the Norse world. We have two statues. We have a statue of Freyr, who was sitting in this cross-legged pose. We also have Cernunnos. There's a cauldron that depicts Cernunnos in kind of that cross-legged pose. But that's about it. We don't really have any other evidence of how they would have sat, or how they. We have sources saying that they just laid down flat on their back under an animal skin. We have a few sources like that. And then we can speak about trance states, getting into like theoretical stuff with Saidid related to shamanism, these ecstatic states of probably dancing or some of that. But that's all I know of from the Norse. But Stefan, is there anything from the East about what position one would be said to be in when they're getting to these altered states of trance and things like that? Anything about the position or activity they were doing at the time?
Nothing similar to to the East, and sitting mostly similar to your to what you said in the Norse sources, lying down, simply lying down, and no mention of animal skins as far as I'm aware, but totally possible. The whole point was that they were isolating, or being with close people, and their body wasn't supposed to be moved at all, because in these states it was very important afterwards, of course, to return to the body, and for the body to be in the same position, basically. And if you move the body, well, things could go wrong.
Yeah.
The person could potentially die, and so forth.
Yeah.
And also the consequences of the battles that they engaged in, because they engaged in battles with other spirits or other shamans or dragons or whatever who brought hailstorms to devastate, the crops and so forth. The consequences of these battles were visible on the physical bodies of the people after they returned. So they could have bruises, bleeding. They needed time to recover, to heal, to so forth. So yeah, that's all when it comes to positions.
Yeah, lots of similar in the Norse, especially when we touch on the war stuff a bit later in the video. Christina, any kind of patterns that you've recognized? Do certain cultures tend to do their meditation or trance states in certain positions, or is it kind of random like that?
It's the same thing. It's kind of random. What's more valuable is actually not necessarily the position you're in, but if you're barefoot, if like when you're sitting, if you're actually like your spine, your lower spine is on a rock or in the dirt or something of that sort. In Peruvian shamanism from the pocket, I'm literally in a class for them right now. We're doing the studies. We were just going over meditation and body positions for connecting to the elements. So connecting to storms, rain, hail, stuff like that, because that's actually the most powerful form of connection. The only thing that they had was there's no position your body should be in. It was just that nothing should be crossed because it stops the energy from flowing. So it's actually kind of counteractive to a lot of other where you see like Tibetan and stuff like that, to where they're cross-legged, hands are in certain positions. They don't want anything crossed because it can stop the flow from going through the body. And you should be covered in a cocoon because the idea is no outside influence is supposed to come in. You're just supposed to be embodying the storm. You're supposed to be connecting to the storm. So that's the only things I've seen, not even in any of the Native American stuff, or at least any of the Siberian stuff. I've come across the Norse stuff to where the body has to be in a certain position. The only common I think I've seen is just flow. Make sure that there's always flow going through the body.
Makes sense. And especially that with the cocoon type of thing. It's again, lots of sources where we're covered in animal skins or something like that in the North. So that's very cool, and especially I could see that being an open state, so the energy flows. So you're not any cross-legged or anything like that. Would serve a different purpose than just sitting still in meditation.
Yep, and the covering is transformation as well. You're literally cocooning. You're coming out into a new form when you come out of that connected state.
Yeah.
And are there any things that are placed around the person for protection, for example? Because I've encountered some examples where, let's say, knives or axes or things which are metal are placed around the person in case some other spirit would come to possess the body while he is outside of the body.
I only know of one source for that. When you are one, so this comes from much later on folk tradition. I think like an illegal practice that was recorded. If you are doing utiseta, so if you're sitting out on a burial mound, which was illegal, you place an axe in the ground in front of you and you stare into the axe like that. I'm sure like covering yourself with the skin kind of had that same effect, but that's about all I know about that.
Okay.
As far as, again, I don't know anything, like Thor was saying, with axes and furs and all that stuff, kind of stuff to cover protection, spirits, stones, things like that, because stones they are an entity, they are a spirit. Stones are ancient, they can help protect you. So that's like kind of more of the Norse things. Peruvian stuff, they're like way more risk takers. They don't believe that an evil entity can kind of quote unquote possess you, because they don't even believe in evil or good entities. Spirits, like even spirits of chaos, are necessary. So whatever is going to enter into you is going to enter into you, and it's up to you. That's your role. That's your strength, is dealing with that and understanding it. The biggest thing, actually, the big risk for you to have is actually when you're in a trance state of that sort and you have people with you like say the three of us, like, you know, we're in the woods together or something like that. We're doing that kind of meditation. You have to have a very deep, good connection with that person, because if you don't know them that well, you're uneasy about them or something of that sort, your guys' energies, like our energies, can cross, and other spirits that are supposed to embody you and embody me can all get mishmash and mixed up and all that stuff. Some ceremonies and rituals are even done with people standing around the shaman in the middle, but their backs are turned towards the shaman because they cannot interfere with any of the spirits coming in, and they act as like a protective wall.
Interesting. Yeah, it rings a bell. Rings a bell. I swear I must have read something like that in some saga somewhere, but
It's gotta be
come to mind
somewhere.
now. Yeah. Out of the thousands and thousands of pages, I don't remember right now.
Yeah, apparently with trance states, the biggest risk is not the spirits, it's other people you're with. So make sure you're doing this stuff with people you trust.
Yeah.
There you go. Okay, what's the next one? That's good intro. Shapeshifting. Turning into an animal versus taking control over an animal. Definitely plenty of this in the Norse sources. We have it both ways. Meditation, before going into battle, and you're taking on the spirit of a bear or a wolf. We have records of people changing into animals. This is not just in the mythology, of course. Odin did it, Loki did it, Freya did it. It's all over the mythology, but it's also in pretty regarded to be pretty accurate historical sagas. People have changed into this. There was an aide of King Harald Bluetooth who changed into a whale and traveled to Iceland. So it seems like, and of course, in the Sami tradition, it's so many dozens of times that they were able to do this. Most of the time, it's not changing into an animal, but it seems like they're sending their soul out to take control of an animal, and then they do whatever work they need to do that way. But is that found in the Slavic tradition at all?
Taking the shape of an animal, definitely, whereas taking the possession of an animal, not so much as far as I'm aware. Taking the shape of an animal is, as I mentioned before, these weather shamans, or however we call them, right? They took the shapes of animals to, their spirit actually went out of their body to take a shape of an animal, and they usually were described as fighting beings which represent chthonic forces. So these hell-bringing spirits usually were described as dragons and so forth, whereas the benevolent, you could say, shamans that fought against them, they have a variety of names, and it's very interesting because in the Slavic, in the South Slavic areas, in the Balkans, they're also called dragons. And now there is a confusion here because the dragon is usually a traditionally, chthonic underground creature and so forth. And here the traditional names were substituted by foreign names, so the dragon started not being called dragon, he was called names which they adopted from the Greeks or the other neighboring peoples. And so the dragon became the name for these shamans who fought against the actual dragons, right? But the thing which happened is that the storm god Perun himself was fighting in these battles as well. And we know this because after the Christianization, it was Saint Ilya who got all the attributes of Perun, riding his chariot, fighting against dragons and so forth. And when this happened, these dragon people, or these weather shamans, or however you call them, they would go into trance, and they would accompany Saint Ilya, right, Perun, to fight the dragons. So, I mean the actual dragons. Okay, sorry for the confusion here, but like it's the tectonic, the real malevolent forces.
So the good people could take the shape of dragons as well in whatever spiritual realm.
Yes,
Hmm.
and they accompanied Perun, and Perun in one, because the mythology is not recorded, but in one tale we actually, also from the South Slavic, almost at the border with Greece, he is described as this glorious prince, king actually of a mountain, and he shapeshifts himself. So very similar to, as you said before, to Odin. He turns into clouds actually, and just throws the lightnings, at his opponent and so forth. So we see how this is related to the shamans. The protectors were kind of a small, they were a reflection of the god in the microcosm for their village, while he was on a macrocosmic scale. And aside from that, there is also the most popular source, the tale of Igor's campaign, where the prince is transforming into a wolf. He is transforming into various animals, and we see the same thing in South Slavic heroes, especially transforming into various animals, especially like dragons and so forth, because it's related to the shaman guys, in order to fight against somebody. So that's mainly where we see it. This is especially recorded in epic poetry, folk songs, and things like that.
Very cool. Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, I think that that has maybe a much more developed concept of that than the Norse. And changing into animals, and I know I've read quite a bit of it in the like Siberian shaman tradition, but they mostly use that for hunting. They take the shape of a reindeer in order to find the other reindeer and get them to trust them and get their smell and things like that. That's the only thing I've read about it. But Christina, do you know anything else, either in the Siberian or Native American shamanic tradition of transforming into animals or taking control of an animal, anything like that?
Yeah, you just took the words out of my mouth with the Siberian ones. That's the only thing, at least I've been
Mostly
able
for
to find.
hunting, right? Don't find much else other than that.
Yeah, it's for hunting, because what you embody, you will attract. That's the law. So, and it is similar in the sense to connecting to the animal for its medicine. So medicine is not necessarily for healing, it's knowledge, it's all that stuff. When we think of the word medicine, we think of like medication, things like that, to heal when sick. Medicine is to strengthen our inner soul. Medicine is lessons for our soul. So with the Native Americans, like I'll use my one of my mentors, Peter, for example. He embodies white eagle, because eagle is that highest form of kind of illumination, I guess you can say, so to speak. And eagles fly at a ridiculously high altitude. They oversee over the world and stuff. So by embodying that, it is done through physical appearance. So obviously the headdresses, the regalia, all that other kind of stuff. You see that with a lot of Native American cultures all over the world. Well, Native American, sorry, in the US, but you see a lot of, through the Americas, anything, you'll see them wear the skins, you'll see them wear the feathers, all that stuff, because you're embodying that particular animal for its capabilities. I haven't seen anything to where you're kind of taking over the animal or shifting into the animal physically, except for, like I said, skinwalkers, things like that. They would form into like this coyote kind of looking kind of entity, which usually the story is coyote, because coyotes are actually one of the only animals not on any of the medicine wheels in any of the Native American tribes in the United States. So coyote is that more vengeful kind of spirit with its angry. But mostly I've seen in the Peruvian medicine and all that other stuff, it is to embody, to bring in the lessons from that animal. The animals are absolute pure in their behaviors, intentions, the way they're supposed to be. They're not altered and messed up like the rest of us are, like humans are. So we learn from them. It's an honor to connect to them and give them, they share their medicine with us, not the other way around. We don't overrule them. So it's for that.
Could you maybe give an example of like a specific which animals would be tied to which type of wisdom or
Yeah.
healing? Like we see the first thing that comes to mind is the feathers,
Yes.
specific birds' feathers. There may be just a couple birds' feathers you can go over and why they use that, what the purpose of that is.
So to understand the medicine that the animal provides, you have to actually look at the behaviors of the animal itself. So not some like silly dream book that tells you if you see a dove, it means peace and that. No. It's, it like if you're going to wear owl feathers, you're going to embody owls. You're embodying perception. You're embodying silence while moving, while flying and stuff. That might be tactical as far as maybe war or something like that goes, where you can fly in and out silently. They offer things, if you think of the lessons that come from the animals themselves, like I'll give the Peruvian medicine wheel, for example. Their south direction is represented by snake, which is your underworld, dirt, all that other kind of stuff. The actual behaviors of the snakes are transformation, shedding skin, but it's not just shedding skin, it's shedding skin and growing more vibrant and brilliant colors. It's transformation. Snakes are also representative in the underworld of embodying into our body, eating what does not belong, because they can go into the dirt and vomit out the energy that is no longer needed by us and give it down to the underworld to be recycled and reused. So you embody it for that case. But like I said, to answer your questions, you look at what the animal does itself, and that's the wisdom that it would give to you.
Yeah, it's just because there's a few. Sometimes it's way too difficult to tell, but there's a few of the Norse sources. It doesn't really have to do with shamanism. It's more like war. For example, the farmers when they were fighting against Saint Olav, they dressed themselves up in Sami, like magically blessed reindeer skins. And the idea, and that made them immune to any sharp weapons. So the idea is reindeers just have such resilience, and their behavior is like that, and they can forage from anything, and they survive the winter in the harshest times. So they put those pelts on before they go into battle to stay protected. Then we have the wolves, the berserkers and the Ulfhednar, where they coated themselves up with a bear skin. The berserkers who had the bear skins on, they were more like outlaws. They were more like troublesome, selfish, devouring figures. They roamed the countryside, terrorizing lands basically by themselves, and really kind of greedy and devouring like gluttonous creatures. But earlier in the Viking Age, we have more records of the Ulfhednar. They coated themselves with wolf skins, and wolves behave in a pack. So these were like pack warriors who actually integrated quite well with society, and they were even selected as the highest guard for the king. So, which is something berserkers would have never been selected for. So, I kind of see the parallels to that. That's and I think there's that would be a very long art determining exactly which animals are responsible for what and how wearing their skins can help us. But yeah, all pretty interesting. It ties back to the same kind of beliefs.
Yeah, right. I love that. I love when everything connects. It's so freaking cool. Okay, sorry, Stefan. I didn't mean to speak over you.
No. It's very interesting what you said. It's just I wanted to add a little bit about the eagle that you mentioned earlier. It reminded me of basically in the Serbian tradition. Of course, you have parents, grandparents, and each generation has its name. But the 16th male generation, so your 16th ancestor from your paternal side, is called white eagle, and your 16th grandmother, basically great grandmother, is a white bee. So it really shows that these animals, bees and eagles and so forth, were definitely part of the ancestral cult and the spirituality. And bees are, we see them in some descriptions of the world tree or in the cosmic tree, in the how they're making honey in the trunk. And the eagle is very related to heroism, again, to something which is related to battle, because again in the epic poetry a lot of heroes are described wearing feathers of falcons or eagles, and the eagle and the falcon is one of the embodiments of the highest god of Perun, essentially. So there's these parallels for sure. And again, these shamans that we spoke about earlier, one of the shapes that they could take when battling, against these hail spirits was an eagle. But the eagle could also bring the hail, so it's all mixed, depending who's bringing it.
Cool, very interesting. All right, well, so we touched on it already, but now we're getting to the good part. Battle. How is shamanism type things used in battle? Berserkers, shape-shifting, cursing, bringing fear or blunt weapons to an enemy. Those are the things that we touched on a little bit before, but we can go into a bit more depth in it now. Of course, all of the above in Norse. How much of it was actually shamanism is hard to say. One tale when there was a battle, there was one man laying by himself in the hall, and he was controlling a bear. Yeah, so we think he was meditating and sending his soul out, and he controlled a bear that was ferocious and destroying the battlefield. That's a pretty actual historical saga, we think. Again, we have shape-shifting. That's about the only thing that has to do with shape-shifting. But other parts, of course, when they're putting on the wolf skins and getting themselves up into a trance fury, fighting like wolves and bears and things like that, we find a lot in the sources. We also have Odin, who was said to be able to help his warriors in a few ways. He chanted Gulded. We don't know if they considered this shamanism at all, but Odin chanted Gulded, like magical songs, so he could protect his warriors in battle. He could bring fear to the opposing enemy force. He could make the opposing enemy force have their weapons blunted so they can't cut. And we this is just mythology, of course, but we find this in, again, at least a dozen historical sagas when some witch in the village or some kind of shamanic-like figure chanted curses or did something on the outside of the battlefield, a short distance away, and they could bring a storm. They could also blunt the enemy's weapons, again, just like Odin did. And they could do different things like that. We don't know if that's like shamanism, if they were getting themselves up into a trance state and navigating the spiritual realms and all that, but it very well could have been. One thing we know for sure, it was there was one seer. This was the Normans, actually, when they were invading England. So this was long after the Vikings had settled there, and they were officially Christian by that time. But they brought a witch with them to battle, and they set her up on a platform, and she was dancing, and she was showing her ass, and she was chanting curses at the other side. It seemed like that was definitely a later on parallel of Seidr, actually, which is what the Norse shamanism is equated to, and that was the Normans using that when their ancestors used that probably hundreds of years before. So that's just a few records of how we can say they used shamanism, possibly, or just general magic in battle. But I think there's a lot more in the Slavic tradition, so you can take over and speak about that.
I'm not sure if there's a lot more in the Slavic tradition, but there's definitely parallels which are very interesting. The thing is, it can get a bit confusing with the terminology, and I'm trying to be simple, but sometimes it's not possible. As I said before, originally the term for the dragon, which was Zmai, Zmai, or whatever, was related to underworld, energies and forces and the underworld gods and so forth. In the Slavic South, a bit afterwards, it changed, and the term for the dragon became to be associated actually with the storm god, with the sky god, with the highest god, who was essentially accompanied by these dragon people, right? So in the South, basically the term got a meaning of what we would say shaman, somebody who can practice such weather shamanism. And apparently Perun was, the leader of these people, because we clearly see it in legends and in folklore. And so what's interesting is that this same term used for these people, among many terms, is also applied to epic heroes who fight against historically, Turkish oppression or so forth, but also against dragons and other mythical creatures. And this term is very often, because we're talking about folklore, and the folklore is much later, and so it's not so reliable as actual historical sources or sagas or the Eddas and everything that you have. So terms become a lot, they mix, because people develop various beliefs, superstitions, and so forth. But we can see how the same term was used for heroes, for actual people who were, who embodied heroism and who were said to be descendants of the dragon, so essentially Perun, and a fairy or a nymph, right? So you have the merging of the celestial storm god father and the earth feminine principle, thereby born from this. And we also see that in the songs they're always donning, bear skin, or let's say a hat made of 12 wolf pelts or things like that, And this is interesting because there is another term, one of the many terms used for these people is vukodlak or volkodlak, and it essentially means wolf-haired or wolf-pelted. And of course, we don't have actual sources that suggest that there were Slavic warriors who wore wolf pelts and so forth. But when you make the comparative mythology and folklore, scholars have suggested that this is the case because there's nothing else that it can be, because we have the clear parallels between a type of shamanism which is related to weather and protecting the crops in the community, but also being a heroic leader of the same community, or a heroic protector of the same community. So and involving, donning various animal skins, various pelts, and sometimes, as you said, also in some cases this is seen negatively, because there is one tale where there is a man who is dressing up as he's basically putting bear skin on him, but he's doing a mess in the village. This is a Serbian tale, and stealing, breaking, chasing women and so forth, and yet he is called a vukodlak, as if he's wearing a bear. As if he's wearing a wolf skin, even though he's wearing a bear skin, right? And so we see how these things in the folklore have kind of merged, but when we study it a bit deeper, you clearly see the same parallels that you can find, in European and general Indo-European backgrounds, and even broader, I believe. So there's definitely that, and in the epic poetry, there's a lot of other things which suggest this. For example, I recently had a video where there's the trial of initiation. So young men are basically, in order to get married and accepted into society, they have to face an opponent who is basically a mask. It's a costume of a three-headed dragon. It's a real costume that they have to face. And these young men in the songs are generally associated with wolves or carry the name wolf or something like that. So there's definitely, big connections here, and it's a very big topic.
Yeah. I mean, that's the Koreos. That's the Indo-European. Basically, every culture in Europe has tales of that, and it's super interesting. When you first started speaking about it, I was like, okay, Slavic things. This sounds incredibly similar to the Berserkers and the Ulfhednar. Maybe this came from the Rus, and they spread out these tales throughout the east of Europe. But the more you spoke about it, I'm like, no, that's like Indo-European. This is something that goes back 7,000-8,000 years, probably. This tradition of dressing up in animal skins, these initiations, these uses in battle, and things like that. So yeah, that definitely is I think that's more of an Indo-European thing.
Yep.
Is there anything else? I'd like to think that it's a big Indo-European thing that goes back to when we were all one people 7,000-8,000 years ago, because I haven't read too much about that in other cultures around the world. But Christina, have you read anything like that? It doesn't necessarily have to stick on like shamanism used for battle, but any kind of animal skins taking on the form of an animal, anything suggesting that warriors could be spiritual as well.
Well, definitely the warrior thing is a little bit of my weak point as far as this knowledge and stuff goes. But what I can share with that is very common, like to use the strength of an animal for protection. That's something you find very, very commonly. Like Stefan was saying, I'll piggyback off of that, the divine masculine and divine feminine. In most cultures, at least my findings, I really should have been an anthropologist, like by paper, is what I should have been in life. But there's always that divine masculine, divine feminine, and the masculine energy is something that you always wanted to tap into in order to help be that protector, that leader, and things like that. And yes, in the end, use that for battle, because you want to connect with that animal spirit, that strength, to use it for your endeavors. So it's not necessarily a shamanic thing, so to speak. It's shamanic type practices are used to connect to that that energy, to that animal, but it is to embody that, to ask that spirit to be with you and let me be cunning like the wolf. Let me be, have perception of birds. Let me, have the pack and my group and my people with me. Let me be a strong like bear. You're asking for that to be connected to you. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get it, but because again, the spirits can choose whether or not they're going to interact with you. But I can see it in you embody that animal to use it for your endeavors. And usually the masculine, the men, physically the warriors, would be the ones connecting with animal for those types of protective things, because it's been like that for centuries. You guys have always been the protectors. You've always been up front. So yes, warriors can totally be spiritual too. And if anybody shoves that off, I'm sorry, you're missing the point here.
Modern times have maybe skewed that view, but in ancient times, definitely.
No, because
they were the most spiritual.
It makes sense. Why would you not want to embody a bear if you know you're going into battle? Why would you not want that? You're missing a superpower. You're missing a superpower, man. Like, come on.
I think that the biggest difference the Indo-European culture is a warlike culture. That's
Hmm.
that's probably why we find more examples of this using animal pelts and using shamanism, specifically in the Viking culture and Germanic culture. When we find it a little bit in the older Indo-European religions as well, but I think mostly in the Germanic. But the Indo-European culture in general was a very, very warlike culture, so it makes sense that that's the most sources that we have. But it doesn't necessarily mean that regular people couldn't make benefit of that as well. Maybe they used birds or a snake to help them with something like that. It's just they did just like indigenous, traditions and things like that. It's just whatever the culture is. If it's more warlike or less warlike, that's going to reflect on at least the sources we have. But it doesn't necessarily mean that that was the only thing they used.
Just wanted to add, if you don't mind, earlier we spoke about these shamans and warriors and so forth. You have mentioned in one of your videos there is a Baltic example, Latvian or Lithuanian,
Yeah.
where a man dresses up as a wolf. He's basically on trial, and they're asking him what were you doing with your buddies, and he's like, well, we put wolf skin and we go down to hell and we fight the devil to get the crops. So this is literally the same thing as the weather shamans that we spoke about before, but we see a clear example where he puts the wolf skin on, in order to do that. So, because he's again fighting for the crops. And what's interesting in this case is that in the Baltic languages, the devil is basically Velnias, which is just a corrupted, I mean, it's a word of which originally was the name of the underworld god, a cognate of Veles, and the Christians just turned it into devil. But Veles is the opponent of Perun, and Velnias is the opponent of Perkunas. And so you see how these guys put the wolf clothes to go down into hell to fight the devil, Velnias, right? To restore the crops. And it's interesting because in the same source, the guy says, you Germans, who are putting him on trial, you have a different hell. It's not the same hell. So that's the same thing.
And that was exactly that. When I first read about that kind of whole theory about that was in one of Barik's books, and mutual, we're fans of his, both of us. But going into the underworld at the solstice or sometime in the early winter, dressing up as wolfskins and fighting off the winter spirits and bringing back the crops and all this good thing and bringing back the life. And that's equivalent to the Norse myth with symbolism of Balder dying and Vali going and hunting down Hodr, and Odin going down into the underworld too. So it's all the same thing. You have to look pretty deep in the symbolism, but it's so cool we have that source from Latvia or Lithuania where he actually did exactly that. It seems.
And in the South Slavic and generally Slavic folklore, the crops are basically devoured by the hell-bringing dragon. They are devoured, but this devouring is not a real devouring. It's basically the hail. So the destruction with hail is described as being devoured by these witches or dragons or whatever they are. So when the dragon is killed, basically he vomits out everything that he has eaten. It's the myth of Indra and Vritra, who restrains the waters in a way, and then he's killed and the waters return. Well, this is just with other things. But yeah, it's again that renewal and that restoration of order and balance in the universe, which you can totally apply, spiritually on you.
Well, it sounds pretty dangerous. I hope there are maybe some still people in the world doing these things, keeping us all alive. But I don't know. Maybe that's why the world is going to hell, because enough people aren't doing these very old rituals to bring the balance.
Yeah.
No, I don't think there are enough people.
Yeah.
It one of the parallels with that too is the Underworld Journeys and stuff like that with I don't know much about the Native American ones with that, but I know with the Peruvians is you go to visit the underworld. You don't belong there because it is a world of recycled energy, of flow. There's always a guardian, there's always a shapeshifter, anything of that sort. You have to go through wells and water and all that stuff as a cleansing to go there. And when you go there to visit there, the stories, the way you can apply these teachings of what happens in the underworld is actually part of soul retrieval. So in shamanic thing, you actually bring back your own light. Or if you're doing it for a person, like if one of you guys are my clients, I would be helping you bring a soul part back. I'm the medium in between. So I can go with you to the underworld and stuff like that. But it's, like you said, it's bringing things out of there because that's where that truly hidden light is. You can't see that light without dark. So it has to suck. It has to hurt. It has to be the hardest places you're going to bring back that light, that soul part. And why we're not doing it for the earth makes no sense. Why we're not nurturing the soil, why we're not nurturing the land, why we're not nurturing the spirits, the interaction, the destruction that we do, why we're not doing prayers just for the land. I went to an apple orchard yesterday and in front of a ton of people left an offering. I did a whole Kintu ceremony, which is Peruvian. You use bay leaves here because you can't use coca leaves because cocaine. So you can't have that here. But I did an offering because I felt like when I was there, nobody's giving thanks. Everybody's just taking all the apples off the trees. Nobody was grateful one bit for everything that was provided, for the land, for growing all these trees, for the people that put into the work of that, all of the soil, all of the nutrients, all of the bugs, and all the work to make that happen. And it immediately hit me when I walked into the place, and especially too, my husband's in the trees trying to get some apples out, and as he came out, one of the trees, like the branches, snapped so hard on the back of his neck, he was bleeding. And I'm like, oh, I think it wants life force. It's like, I think the land wants some blood, some life. I was like, all right. So I just kind of swiped a little bit of the leaf on there, the bay leaf, and I gave an offering to the land. At least one person maybe gave thanks.
Yeah, it's too bad. Everybody should be, but it helps a lot if you have your own land that you can do these things with. That's a big part of it. So looking forward to the last one. That's pretty much it. The last topic we wanted to cover is healing, shamanism, and healing. This is something I have nothing to say on. These types of things were not used in the Norse world that we know of. There was one single example of Seidir, which is the parallel to shamanism. One single example of that being used to heal, and the rest is all used for like cursing, prophecy, divination, those types of things, changing the weather, and all that stuff. So healing, we know they used healing, but it seems like they did it more through sacrifice. The alpha blood was used for healing in the Norse sources, and rune magic. A good portion of all of the runic amulets and runic sticks that we find were for healing. But as for shamanism, there are no ties to that I know of in the Norse sources. But and anything that you can think of, Stefan.
There's definitely people who are doing healing, and they have a very special kind of social status. Sometimes it was believed that they were the ones, that could put curses, which would lead to illnesses and so forth, and at the same time, the ones who could, heal from such things. And sometimes they are two distinct categories of people. Again, we're speaking about much later folklore, so there is definitely Christian influence, but in a lot of cases, I see just pure folk tradition. Essentially, mostly it was women who had this function, and there could be males. Specifically, also they could be males for the category of people that were healing, not the ones who were putting curses. The evil witches, they were mostly the women. But the healers could be both, but yet they were mostly women. And it was necessary that they acquired the knowledge while they were not in their menstrual phase. So either prior, when they were a very young girl, or after, when they stopped, although there's exceptions, of course. Usually it's the elder woman who transmits the knowledge to her granddaughter, for example, and this is done on a bridge. So that's one of the way to become a healer. Basically, the knowledge is transmitted on 3 bridges. The girl.
So was it more of like a knowledge, like an education type of thing, or was it more like a gift or power that was transferred to them?
Both, because there's 2 ways to become. Basically, one is like this, through educations and a ritual. Basically, they went on three bridges, which is a liminal space between the 2 worlds, crossing the river, so forth, and they're reciting some incantations. She's receiving the knowledge. She can continue the thing. And the second and more interesting for our topic is the initiation by basically either a vision, dream, or something in between, which is linked to coma, near-death experience, and things like that. And so essentially what happens is, let's say, these things have been documented again in ethnography, by people, and there's stories about these healers who, let's say, people knew who lived when they were young. And there is an example of a woman who was married, but she couldn't have children for 10 years. And, this is very important when you live in a very traditional society. It's your natural role to be a mother and to have children and so forth. She was very depressed. Her husband tried to get rid of her, she didn't want to leave. Eventually, she started to not eat anything, nothing, literally not eat. And she had a vision of Saint John. So we see Christian influence here. But again, we can talk about that after, because it's very weird for this to be Christian influence. I think they're seeing things or interpreting things from a Christian perspective, even though they're maybe seeing something else, right? So Saint John appears and he tells her to go to a monastery where there's basically a sacred spring nearby or something, to wash herself with that. She will be able to conceive. But she has to give him the first child. She does that, she gets pregnant, she has a child, it's a daughter, she lives 2-3 years, eventually she dies. Saint John took her child. After that, she again goes in a depression, kind of coma, even completely. And in this coma state, she says she has visited both heaven and hell and seen everything, and returns from there as a healer, and she acquires basically the knowledge from the other world, and she starts performing the incantations and the rituals and so forth. And most examples include this connection with other worldly beings, mythological creatures. So it can be saints, it can be a type of nymphs or fairies called Vila from the Slavic folklore in general. Sorry, it can be even the Mother of God, Jesus, God, whatever. People experience these things, and sometimes these beings tell them you have to do this. This is your calling. This is your vocation. And if you don't do this, you're going to be punished. And so what happens is people, when they refuse, there's stories of healers who refused. Like one woman refused, and she had 4 children which died. And eventually she was threatened in the dream, like you're going to be some being or God, as she describes, was holding a straw, and she was at the other end of the straw. And he said, I'm going to drop this. I'm just going to fly away, and you're going to fall into the abyss, if you don't accept, and she accepted and actually had children afterwards again, even though we said previously, they're not supposed to be in that stage where they have kids. And all of these visions and dreams involve, going to the other world, basically, and it involves climbing ladders, stairs, mountains to ascend to the sky, or going in holes and caves and so forth to go in the underworld. And basically that's where they either get this message like you have to do this or else, or they just after so much traumatic events, they just have these complete breakdowns that they experience these things and return as healers. And it's interesting that they also cross a bridge in these experiences, like a bridge thin as hair or thin as a blade that only the righteous can cross, and that's how they get these abilities. So then she can maybe transmit it to her grandkids or whatever. But that's generally how it goes. And they use various tools like animal deer antlers. They use horseshoes. They use herbs, which are believed to have various properties. There's a lot of things. The wolf, there's like a million things related to the wolf in these healing things, and the incantations, they send basically the disease to the other world. So like the healing essentially is, there is a threat to this illness, whatever it is. It's chased away, it's destroyed, it's whatever. There is the incantation that sends it to the other world in a way, because it's described as a place. It's a forest, or it's a place where roosters don't sing, or church bells don't ring, or people don't get married, or there is no life. It's somewhere outside of the known world. And then there is, while this is being performed, the illness is kind of moved from the body down to the arms, the stomach, and it exits through the legs, through the feet, because that's where the connection is with the earth, and so it can go from there. It can also enter from there, kind of. And then there's the process of healing the person fully. So there's blowing as a tool, because blowing is like symbolically, in Greek mythology, in Norse mythology, even in the Bible, I'm sure other mythologies, the gods give the breath through the breath. That's how they give life. So there's breathing on the mouth, or there's breathing on the chest, or the place that was that had the disease, and so forth, where the disease was. There's also tying the disease to something, like in knots and imitative magic, then it's thrown or sealed somewhere or hidden. And there's also the type where the person is passed through a sort of entrance, sort of something kind of like a portal, like either stones with holes, or trees that have roots, and then under the roots, or trees that have been split. Children sometimes are passed through wolf skin from the jaw, or the whole skull, and like they're passed through it. if they have like fright disease, if they're traumatized by something, and they, the wolf is invoked and it passes. All these passages are like, symbolic rebirth, whatever they pass through. So yeah, there's a lot of these things. And what's interesting also is that as I said, the illness is kind of sent in the other world, and that's generally, in the incantations of the Balkans you find that, but I've seen some Russian incantations where basically it's very interesting because the healer summons Saint George or some other saint who is a substitute of Perun, and we see this because he's descending from the sky with golden arrows of lightning and on a chariot, and it's like he's invoked to clean the body basically of this illness. But the way this is done is that the illness is placed on a bear, and the bear is one of the symbols of Veles, of the god of the underworld and of death. And so it is placed on this black bear, and it's said, take this illness, you bear, into the forest, so that may never return. So it's again chased away into some kind of unknown, otherworldly place, but here in a more mythological way, where you can see actually some remnants of deities. In the Slavic South, there's the same things where they invoke Jesus and Mary and so forth, but it's not that. There's not the story behind it,
I'm glad you said all that, because it rung a bunch of bells with me. It's the same thing in the Scandinavian folk tradition. This is, of course, much later than official pagan times, but we think it's all pagan, so it's we find a lot of the same things there. And I like what you brought up about those abilities. So it's not necessarily shamanism that is used, not like any kind of direct spiritual journeys or trance states like that is used to heal someone, but to gain those abilities. Definitely, we can tie it to shamanism. Like we have in the folk tradition, drink the water of an albino snake that was boiled in it. That's not a Christian thing. We have another climb under a corpse of a dead man, and then you will get this healing gift. And those types of things. We can also maybe think about Odin when he hung on the tree for 9 nights, which is a representative of some shamanic type upper world or underworld journey, and then he learned the runes, and a lot of those runes have to do with healing. So to gain those abilities may be some sort of shamanic initiation ritual, but it's not necessarily used. You don't use shamanism every time someone has a little cough, something like that.
There are instances where the healer actually falls asleep or goes into some kind of trance state to contact either the saints or the fairy nymphs beings or the whatever she is contacting, and to ask for guidance, like what should be done for this person. And afterwards, like they have a headache or whatever. It's not all of them, but there's instances of that as well. But there's nothing like, at least I haven't found, that they've used drums or things like that.
Well, yeah, Christina can speak a lot about that. What do you have to say? There's probably a lot of ways you can go with it. I know it's used a lot more for healing in the Eastern traditions, but let us know what comes to your mind first.
There's just so many parallels. Like the whole time Stefan is talking, I'm like, yes. I'm just sitting here getting all pumped up in my microphone, and I'm learning so much from you. Just so you know, thank you so much. But yes, you hit the nail on the head as far as that goes. It's connecting to that spirit for the ability for healing. So yes, you do have some physical healing as far as like plant medicine and all that stuff goes. And again, medicine, yes, like, the physical plant, like chewing on plantain, making it into a poultice and putting it on a cut or a bite or something like that, it would heal you. There is actual herbalist medicine involved. But as far as healing, you also have the medicine of the plant as far as its knowledge goes to heal the body. It is a way of healing is done is the shaman is just the medium that gains the knowledge in between, or medicine woman or man or whatever it is you want to call it. You gain the knowledge and then use the ability. Like Stefan was saying, breath is so important. That is the lesson that I can't shout from the rooftop loud enough, because once you have gone into that intermediate, into that trance state, calling in all of the spirits that you want to assist to heal this person. Again, you're just a vessel calling in those spirits, calling in that knowledge. When you call it in, it has to come out somehow, right? And that's your breath. And your breath comes from your heart center. So it's coming from the purest part of you that's not altered by anything. In Peruvian medicine, you have this. Hold on, I got to read it off my notes here because my pronunciation is awful. It's huacha, Hucha, coming from the Cuero. And it is heavy energies that build and cause problems within a body. So like you said, it's not necessarily for healing a cough, but it's for healing very similar to the Norse version of luck, of things that happen around you and all that kind of stuff, and your interactions. Because if your huacha is very, very heavy and you're not connected to everything, you're not interacting with the spirits, and you're going to have bad luck, and you're going to have issues, and your crops are not going to grow. You're going to have problems with your family and your interactions with your communities, and also making you physically sick. So it's about that type of medicine as far as like the shamanic stuff goes. And as far as the calling, I wanted to speak on that Stefan was talking about, how healing goes from one person to another. There are, same thing, multiple ways on how that can pass down. It could be, passed down from one person to another. Oh, I'm sorry, I apologize. Passed down from one person to another. Or it can be kind of a calling that you are drawn to, that the spirits are pulling you into. Like, you're supposed to be a healer. With Peruvian, you have the Pacos, and then you have the Alto Masayos, which is like another version of the Paco. The Alto Masayos are the ones that are born every 3 generations, they think, and it's not necessarily just with them. It could be any person in the world. And this person, it is a calling. They are essentially married to the spirits. And if they don't follow this calling, things happen to them. So like their last Alto Masayo, she lived to 99 years old, and she would randomly disappear into the mountains, into the woods for days on end, come back naked and stuff, but with like a whole bunch of knowledge. And they don't know how she survived in the wilderness, all that stuff on her own, but she did. This woman had children and husbands die, because anytime she tried to pursue a life outside of this healing, outside of the calling that she was supposed to be, that life would fall apart. And the more of the refusal of that calling, the more the person falls into depression, falls into bad things happening into their life, into sicknesses, and then they eventually die. So the goal of a healer is to be selfless in that you are willing to let that knowledge and that the spirit and all that stuff inhabit you, and you breathe it out and you translate it, speak it, act it, whatever way you can, to heal that person, that community, that land, so on and so forth.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I know, right? You're saying, like,
you're basically the vessel, you.
Yes.
This is you. Like, you want to do YouTube videos? Well, no way. That's you.
Yep.
Yeah, well, we could do a whole nother podcast episode on just healing. That's a lot of information. I would have to read up on some of the Thrildom traditions as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but that's about it. We've covered everything we wanted to. Is there any other things you guys wanted to cover or ask quickly?
Not really. I just want, maybe to add that, what Christina said, that those things were, it wasn't just about the cough or the wound or whatever, but more spiritual or mental diseases or even physical, in the sense like can't conceive or suffering from, fright or from such things and the spirits would basically advise them to do things as they would advise them to do things like, go get that plant, or go to this sacred spring to drink this water, or wash yourself, or to this cave, or go leave an offering there, or go to church, even, things like that. So it's more about such things than the actual physical. Yeah. Aside from that, I mean, I think pretty much everything is covered. I don't know what to add, but it was definitely a very good conversation. I'm glad we had it.
Yes, great episode, and yeah, we'll go quickly where you can find all of us. That when this podcast will be released, it'll be on part of it on my channel. You can find the full one on Stefan's channel as well, and we will have it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and we'll maybe put a list of all the places you can find it up here. Check out Stefan's channel. It's the World Tree, and you also have 2 books, don't you?
Yeah.
And then where can they find your books, and what are the titles of those?
The 2 books are basically called Slavic Traditions and Mythology. They're 2 volumes of the same book, same title. They're available on Amazon, and that's the only place they are available.
That's good. And then Christina, you have Sacred Temple Wellness, and any other projects or things you'd like people to know about where they can follow you?
No, you can just follow me on Sacred Temple Wellness, and obviously on the Oslaga Sagas podcast. And yeah, you guys can find me. I'm out there.
That's good. All right. Thank you guys, and thank you everybody for watching.
Thank you.